you so much for inviting me into your home. I've never been to Llano, but you like it hot here. So it's not that much different from where I come from, but we have things a little bit more humid. I was telling Bill that when you get thirsty in Florida, you just take a cup and spin it around like that, and you gotta drink of water. We drink our air, so I'm glad I have a bottle of water over there because I'm a little parched all the time when I come to Texas. This is not my first time to Texas, but it is my first time to Llano, so I'm very, very happy to be here. Now, tonight we're going to do the foundation of the Constitution, but today we're going to talk about a very important issue, separation of church and state. Now, we've recognized the people that have taken oaths, our military, our elected officials, and even candidates. And I believe our religious leaders have pledged an allegiance to God. But I want to suggest to you that you're all oath takers. You just took one. I pledge allegiance to the flag, to the United States of America. What is a pledge if not an oath? A promise. It's the same thing. So each and every one of us has taken an oath, and every time you say the Pledge of Allegiance, you take an oath. The problem is there's so many who are in charge of protecting our liberty that don't even understand the oath that they take in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag, not to the flag, not to the cloth, but to the United States of America and the republic for which that flag stands. Notice we didn't say to the democracy, because we are not. And there is a big, big difference. And to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God. Some of you were careful to say that together, one nation under God. But can I suggest to you that it's more than that? We are one nation under God, not one nation under government. And that's something that we have to be actively teaching. One nation under God, indivisible. We are indivisible because we are under God. That's why those statements are right next to each other. When we remove ourselves, when we stop being under God and start being under government, we become divisible. And I think that you can see that happening before us, the fractionalization of our country, because it's government that many have submitted to and not God. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Notice it's liberty, not freedom, not health care for all, not jobs for all, or homes for all, but liberty for all. And I hope that you see and are aware that it's not our jobs that are under threat right now. It is not our health care that's under threat right now. It's our liberty that is under threat right now. And so what it's important for us to understand when we're addressing issues like the HHS mandate, always ask yourself, where is liberty in this law? Because there should never be legislation that gets between you and liberty. Remember, it's Benjamin Franklin who is reported to have said, those who would trade liberty for temporary security will soon have neither. Because you never trade liberty and gain something. You'll lose everything. And so what we want to talk about today is, what is this true application of church and state? Well, there's something that we have to understand from an historical perspective before we really understand the separation of church and state, where we understand the role of government in this country and how our founders came up with government's place in the order of things. Now, I teach a 5-hour seminar, and I really, it is the richest way to understand all of this. And so when you come this evening and hear the historical application, we're actually sort of backtracking. But what you need to understand is that religious history is history. Okay? It is what has made nations rise and fall. Our governments have all been built on religious struggles, regardless of where you are in the planet. And so you cannot remove religious history from history and still have an accurate representation of historical events. Our Constitution is not 234 years old. It's more like 934 years old. Our founders built a constitution on over 700 years of experience and history and 5 documents. We'll talk about those documents this evening, but I just want to introduce to you them briefly because it's important for you to understand. The first document was a promise from a king to not be evil and oppressive. In that promise, one of the first things that he promised was churches will be free from government intrusion. And that was in 1100 England. The king made a promise, stating that if the government is involved in the church, it is an evil and oppressive action, and we will no longer do that. The Magna Carta of 1215 is the second document in the genealogy of our Constitution, which reasserts that the church will not be in submission to the government, but independent and free from government rule. It is the only way to maintain liberty. You have this Petition of Right of 1628, further declaring that the church is free from government. The Grand Remonstrance of 1641 and the English Bill of Rights. Interestingly enough, the English Bill of Rights came to be because 5 ministers petitioned the king of their grievances, because by 1688 they knew they had the right to petition the government of their grievances. These 5 ministers petitioned the king and asked him to get out of their churches, because every document that came before, beginning with 1100, promised the people that the government would stay out of the church. And they said, Your Highness, we are Protestant. Do not put your agents in our church to control our churches and mass convert our people. The king was replacing their chosen bishops with bishops who were not really religious leaders, but captains of his doing. And they would go into the churches and run rule over the churches and collect taxes through the churches and try to convert them into the religion of their enemy. And the ministers petitioned the king receiving their petition, executed them. These ministers sacrificed everything in the name of religious liberty. But they didn't lose, because they started a revolution that would pull government back into place and give them the Bill of Rights of 1689, the very protections of rights that our founding fathers brought to this country. So that when George III began going the same way as the kings before them, they didn't have to make anything up. They already had the guidelines set. And they were able to draw a line and say, George, you've made these promises through the crown, and now we're going to make you live up to them. I had a very good friend of mine say, KrisAnne, in reality, our revolution was not a revolution. It was a restoration. It was George III, after all, who had revolted against the people by denying them their liberty. The people just rose up to restore the things that had already belonged to them. Well, our founding fathers believed many of things. One of the things that they believed was in a philosophy called natural law. Have you heard of natural law? Natural law says that we are created in the image of God. And because we are created in the image of God, we've inherited certain things from God. One of the things that we've inherited from God is freedom, because God is the most ultimate free being in the universe. Anybody wake up this morning and have a direct line to tell God how to run things? I like to try, but it doesn't always work out for me, right? I mean, we do have the right to go boldly to the throne in prayer, but that doesn't obligate God to listen to us. But God gave us that freedom. We don't have the power to do the things that God does with his freedom, but we've inherited that freedom. And along with the power that we do not have the restraint that God has to not do things that we shouldn't do. You see, freedom and liberty are not synonymous. We cannot live in a nation that is purely free. If we live in a nation that is purely free, we are free to lie, we're free to steal, we're free to murder. Do you see how that works? We're free to do whatever is right in our own minds. That's anarchy. Freedom and liberty are not synonymous, and that's something that we have lost sight of in this country. Liberty is actually a delicate balance between freedom and morality. You see, God knew we couldn't handle pure freedom, so he gave us a moral law. Thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not murder. Sound familiar? You see, it's freedom plus morality that guarantees liberty. In the same respect, we can't have a nation that's built on moral law alone. Because a moral law in the hands of men, a theocracy, is tyranny. And that's precisely why Sharia law has no place in this country. Because Sharia law is a theocracy, and it will only bring tyranny. It has no freedom in it. You have to have freedom and morality to ensure liberty for a people. But what do? How do we keep that liberty? Thomas Jefferson said, "How can the liberties of a nation be thought secure? When we remove their only firm foundation, the conviction in the minds of men that liberty is a gift from God." Jefferson knew that if we strayed from that understanding that we were under God, that our liberty would be gone. He went on to say that he feared and trembled for his nation because he knew that we served a just God, and that if we were to forget that liberty was his gift, we would suffer his wrath. Well, something about religious history that's very, very important to the understanding of religious liberty is how we came about having the First Amendment in the first place. It wasn't an accident. It was a very difficult battle. How many of you have heard that our founding fathers actually argued over whether we should have a Bill of Rights or not? Now, there's a lot of misteaching going on about that argument, but I can tell you that it had nothing to do with one half thinking that some of those rights belong to the government and we shouldn't be giving them to the people, and the other half thinking that everything belonged to the people and government should have nothing. Both sides believed that it was the rights belonged to the people and nothing belonged to the government. The argument was based on what is the best way to secure those liberties. One group thought, led by Alexander Hamilton, that if we write them down, if we actually put them on paper, we will be giving the government the permission to abuse them. Because in the Constitution, the rights delegated to the federal government are few and defined. And they went on to define them as war, peace, negotiations, and foreign commerce. Period. They went on and made it perfectly clear by saying everything else Even the very aspects that involve the everyday, ordinary life of the people belongs to the people through their states. There's no gaps there, are there? War, peace, negotiation, foreign commerce, primarily external things, is what James Madison said. And then everything else belongs to the people. And I want to point out to you that he said delegated, so we didn't really give them anything. If you delegate authority, you don't give it up. It still remains with you. You're just transferring that power for a brief period of time to perform a function: war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. You have the right to take it back if that job is not being done properly. Well, the history that drove our founding fathers into this argument and fighting for a Bill of Rights came through the Christians. You see, how many of you have heard that the Pilgrims and the Puritans came to this nation for religious freedom? Right? Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. The king at the time was Charles I. The people were revolting against Charles because he was torturing people to confession. And primarily the people that he was torturing were the Puritans. Because, number one, the Puritans found it a sin to take an oath. So they couldn't take an oath of loyalty to anything or to any religion. And then they were being tortured into confessing that they were Puritan, and they couldn't take an oath, and then identifying other Puritans that could be tortured into confession. Well, Charles was a warmonger, and they had been watching him, finding out that he was not loyal to the Church of England, but actually loyal to the church, to the religion of their enemy. He was talking out of both sides of his mouth. Well, the Puritans fled England and came to the new colonies, to establish new colonies, so that they would be free from Charles and his persecution. But they didn't really understand liberty. They came here and they created charters, which are little governments. Charters are their constitutions, how the government is going to run. And within those charters, they created language that established the religion of that charter. Established that you could not have a church. You could not preach unless you were the religion of that charter. They also passed these laws called Test Acts, which said that if you were going to be in government, you had to take an oath of loyalty to the religion of that charter. You see, They, with good intentions, they were trying to keep their religion from being persecuted. Because if the government establishes that the religion is what it is, and then you don't ever allow anyone in government to believe anything but that religion, then that religion can never be changed, and you're always safe. But that's not liberty. Remember, security is not liberty. And so as these charters developed, there were no charters for the Baptists. And so when the Baptist separatists were being persecuted and they came to the colonies, they had no place to preach. And the pastors were under the firm understanding that they shouldn't be taking a license to preach from the government, because the government doesn't call men into God's service. God does. And so they continued to preach, even though they were literally doing it unlawfully, according to the charter. Well, there's a man, you can confirm all of this. I hope that you don't believe everything that I say. I want you to actually research what I tell you, because it doesn't do me any good if you just go out and repeat what you hear from me. Because you will be challenged on these issues. And I need you to own the answers so that you can own the debate. And so what happens is there's a man named Obadiah Holmes, who's a Baptist, a minister, and he and his friends are having house church because they can't have a building to have church in. They're preaching unlawfully. Someone turns them in. One night, while Obadiah Holmes is preaching in the home of one of his friends, the constable comes and knocks on the door and asks Obadiah Holmes, "Are you preaching outside the charter?" And he says yes. They arrest him, take him into custody. They beat him so severely that he had to spend 7 days on his hands and knees because there was no other way that did not cause him excruciating pain. I want to remind you, this persecution happened on this soil. This is not something that's happened in Iran or China or Russia, but on this soil. Our founding fathers were fully understood what too much power in the hands of government makes men capable of. And so when it came time to develop the Constitution, a group of men in Virginia, the Virginia Baptist General Convention, made this statement. Whether the new federal Constitution, which had now lately made its appearance in public, made sufficient provisions for the secure enjoyment of religious liberty, on which it was agreed unanimously that, in the opinion of the General Committee, it did not. They were telling their people that the Constitution alone, absent a Bill of Rights declaring the liberty of the people, would not protect our nation from what happened already. You see, many of our states at this time still had test acts in their constitutions. And this Virginia Baptist General Convention did not even want to allow the possibility for the government to establish a religion or to interfere with the free exercise of that religion. And so Virginia, the state, and a couple of other states said, because of this, we will not ratify the Constitution. They refused. Well, you see, that was very bad, because the people that knew that were building this nation knew that without a United States, the colonies would remain 13 independent countries, and they would be vulnerable to be picked off one by one by foreign invaders. I mean, France had helped them with the revolution, but they owed France a lot. What would keep them from coming in and declaring some of these colonies, these states, property of France? What about Spain? Spain helped with the revolution. Surely they would want a piece of the pie as well. So they knew it was absolutely vital to create a United States, a union to keep this fundamental aspect of liberty alive. And so the only ace in the hole that Virginia had was the fact that they were refusing to ratify the Constitution. Well, the leader of the Virginia Baptist General Convention was a man named John Leland. He was a Baptist minister. He was also the front runner. He was actually going to be the Virginia delegate to the Constitutional Convention. He was going to be the Virginia representative, and the people wanted it that way because they knew that John Leland would fight for a Bill of Rights. He would fight to ensure religious liberty. John Leland said, "Every man must give an account of himself to God, and therefore every man ought to be at liberty to serve God in that way he can best reconcile it to his conscience. If government can answer for individuals on that day of judgment, let men be controlled by it in religious matters. Otherwise, let men be free." He knew as a believer that every man would stand before God one day and answer for what they did or didn't do. And he said, if government can step you aside and say, "KrisAnne, scoot over. God, I was the President of the United States. KrisAnne was just following me as the authority placed over her. Don't take it out on her that she did not follow you in the ways that you told her to. She was just listening to me. Take out your judgment on me. Well, as believers, you know that's absolutely absurd. That would never, ever happen. That day is individual and personal. So John Leland is saying that can't happen. So government has no place in that decision of the soul. And so they fought for this, but John Leland was the Baptist. He was the minister of his Baptist church, and he didn't want to leave his congregation. I don't think he really felt the call to be a politician. This was not his ministry. His opponent, however, was James Madison. And James Madison would be the Virginia delegate, only because John Leland met with James Madison and said, I will pull out. I will withdraw. I will encourage my people to support you, and you will win. But you must promise us one thing. You must promise us that you will do everything to your last breath to ensure that religious liberty is part of this national compact. Richard Henry Lee, I don't know how many of you have heard of him, but he's a very important founding father. There's so many of them that we've left out of our history teachings for so long. Richard Henry Lee was the drafter of the Lee Resolution, which was a three-step process for the United States to declare independence from Great Britain and form a union. If Richard Henry Lee's resolution had not passed, Thomas Jefferson would have had nothing to write about in the Declaration of Independence. Richard Henry Lee said this, "It is true, we are not disposed to differ much at present about religion. But when we are making a constitution, it is hoped for ages and millions yet unborn. Why not establish the free exercise of religion as a part of that national compact?" So John Leland met with James Madison, and James Madison promised John Leland that he would do everything to ensure that we had a Bill of Rights. And he kept his promise. There's a very good movie called Magnificent Heritage. This Magnificent Heritage movie it's an old black and white movie. It's not exceptionally done. It's not a Hollywood production, but it is a good visual representation of that agreement between John Leland and James Madison. I saw that movie one day and wept. I think about it, it just chokes me up. Not because of the dialogue, not because it was a very compelling movie, but because I saw a man named James Madison take into his possession one of the dearest liberties that we have, that generations had fought to maintain for centuries at their peril, something that our founding fathers were intimately familiar with. Take that promise and keep it for years. Do you know how important it was for James Madison to keep that promise? Remember, their only guarantee that there would be a Bill of Rights was that the fact that they refused to ratify the Constitution. When they elected James Madison to be their delegate, he would have to go and ratify the Constitution so they could get to the process of creating a Bill of Rights and adopting it. They gave up their only leverage for the dearest liberty that they knew to the promise and the word of a man. And I cried because I know not a single person in Washington, D.C. I would trust with that type of a promise to maintain it for years. I don't know about here in Texas, but we elected several conservative, constitutionally conservative people in 2010, and we were very excited about that. And I can tell you, every single one of them, without fail, when the Constitution was on the chopping block, they voted against the Constitution. The ones that you know. Allen West, Marco Rubio, Connie Mack, all of them. Every single one of them. Every single time. You see how great these men were? With integrity and belief and faith. Well, we did ratify the Constitution, and we did start a Bill of Rights. We did ratify a Bill of Rights. We have the First Amendment, which guarantees that Congress shall make no law establishing religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Remind your politicians that they are not only required, not only prevented from establishing a religion, but they are also prohibited from interfering with your exercise, your free exercise. And that's exactly what this HHS mandate does. They'll say, well, we're not violating the First Amendment, we're not establishing a religion. No, but you're interfering with my free exercise, and that is equally as bad. Because remember, Richard Henry Lee said that it is hoped for ages and millions yet unborn. Our founding fathers pledged life, fortune, sacred honor for the unborn. It's even bigger than that, because they weren't doing it for their children or their grandchildren or even their grandchildren. Remember, he said for ages. I believe in the minds of our founding fathers, life began when God conceived, not when the body conceived. Liberty belongs to the creation of God as He conceived it, not as our feeble minds understand it. And that's worth life, fortune, and sacred honor. Well, shortly after we ratified the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, a group of our founding fathers tried to pass a tax to pay Christian teachers, to pay the salaries of Christian teachers. These were very good founding fathers. One of them was Patrick Henry. I love Patrick Henry very, very much. But Patrick Henry, as many of his friends described him, often had an injudicious zeal. He believed so strongly in what he believed that sometimes he couldn't think things all the way through. And so they came up on this debate of, do we collect tax dollars to pay Christian teachers? And the opponents said, we cannot do that because that will be the death of religious liberty. They said this: it is believed to be repugnant to the spirit of the gospel for the legislature thus to proceed in matters of religion, that the holy author of our religion needs no such compulsive measures for the promotion of his cause, that the gospel wants not the feeble arm of man for its support, that it has made and will make again through divine power its way against all opposition, and that should the legislature assume the right of taxing the people for the support of the gospel, it will be destructive to religious liberty. You notice they didn't say it could be or maybe. They said it will be. How do you suppose they were so sure? Well, let me ask you this, and we'll take you through the thinking process that they had. When the government pays an employee with tax dollars, who is its employer? The government, right? If you have a job and you're paid by tax dollars, you work for the state or the federal government, don't you? But whose money is that? It's the people's money, right? Well, do you want your government to spend your money with no restrictions or checks at all? Do you just want to write them a blank check and say, hey, here's our tax money, do whatever you want with it, we don't care? Does that sound reasonable? I know that's what they do, but I mean, that's not what they're supposed to do. You see, we have to understand this in perspective. Government must regulate its spending. Must. Regulation is not bad. It's corruption in regulation that is bad. Government must regulate. We must require them to regulate, so otherwise they just spend things the way they want to and then abuse it. So if you use tax dollars to pay government employees, the government must regulate its employees. Right? Well, this is what they said. Where the state employs whom it employs in its service, it has the right and duty to regulate and dictate to. Soon it may judge and determine who shall preach, what shall be preached, and when they shall preach it. So if you pay Christian teachers with tax dollars, you turn every single school into a government school, because your Christian teachers will become government employees. Well, much to our benefit, those opposed to this law won. But you see, great in these debates, a great portion of this, or at least being highly involved, was a man named Thomas Jefferson. You guys know Thomas Jefferson, right? Thomas Jefferson was elected president. And the Danbury Baptists wrote Thomas Jefferson a letter and said basically this: Mr. Jefferson, because of your fight for liberty, we are so happy that you are our president. Hold on one second. Sorry, it's making noise. I turned it off, it still vibrates, right? Okay. Says, we are so happy that you are our president. Whereas we understand that as president you have no power to write law. They really did say that. And whereas we understand that president you do not have the right to change the Constitution. They really said that too. We just want to make sure that you're still on board, that you're still committed to the same principles that you were committed to when we formed this great nation. Thomas Jefferson replied to that letter in his letter to the Danbury Baptists and said, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people. He's saying, wait a minute guys, you're giving me way too much credit. It wasn't just me, it was everyone. This was a nation built of the people, by the people, for the people. He said, it's the whole American people which declared that their legislature shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. You now have a richer understanding of the context of that statement than 99% of the people in Washington, D.C. and the lawyers and judges in this nation. You see, if you're going to interpret what someone has written in a letter and you can't dig them up and ask them personally, you must go and find out the context in which it is written. Not just the context within the letter, but the context within the society that built the context within the letter. It's a fundamental principle called hermeneutics. And it's the only way to properly understand a document. You see, how many of you have heard separation of church and state is not in the Constitution? It's not. But for once, our judges got it right. When there is a point of ambiguity in understanding the Constitution, they're supposed to, they're required to go to our founding fathers to find out what they meant. Problem is, they only went part way. They stopped at the letter. They didn't understand what he was talking about, and then they got it wrong. You see, Thomas Jefferson was not saying that God has no place in government. He is saying government has no place in the church. There's a big difference there. The free exercise of religion means that all men are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights. That free exercise of religion, you don't forfeit that regardless of who you work for. Our elected employees should be free to express their beliefs. Now remember, he said, as we're building this nation, it's true we're not disposed to differ much, but they went on to say we are building a nation we are hoping for, where all are equal, Jews, Turks, pagans, and Christians. Because they knew when the government sticks its nose in the church, then all can't be equal, that they will play favorites. After all, it was Benjamin Franklin who addressed Congress that said, you have to recognize that when we were in immediate danger in this war with Great Britain, we offered up daily prayer to God. In this room, he's talking about the halls of Congress. And he said, each and every one of you cannot deny that we saw the hand of his divine protection. He went on to admonish them and say, have we forgotten that dear friend? Do we no longer need his assistance? If a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without God knowing, how can a nation rise without him? Does that sound like men who believed that God had no place in government? You see, allowing people to freely express their religion does not create a government with the right to dictate the liberty of the people. If you're a Jew, you can still express your religion. If you're express your religion. If you're a pagan, you can still express religion. And then the fundamental understanding win out. That's the fundamental principle of the First Amendment as a whole. You have freedom of speech and press and assemble, because the only way the truth will win is when you can challenge a lie. Can you imagine if we didn't have the right to freely express ourselves in truth? The world might still be flat. You see, historically, when government inserts itself in the church, its only purpose is to oppress the people. And historically, when the government inserts itself in the church, it's up to the people to stand against it. This is the call of our generation now. This is the call to believers, because remember, Chronicles 7:14 says, if my people, not everyone, just the believers of God, if my people will cry out and repent of their wicked ways, then God will heal this land. But the believers have to understand that they have an obligation to do so. An obligation. I'm gonna wrap this up, but I want to challenge you to think about something. How many of you believe that liberty is a gift from God? Show me. How many of you believe that God gave us this great nation? Okay? Will I offend you if I bring some scripture into this lesson? I'm going to anyway. Matthew 25, verses 14 through 30, the parable of the talents, teaches that when the master gives a gift, the servant has an obligation to prosper that gift. Not bury it in the sand and wait for his return, but prosper it. In that parable, when the master returned to make the servants accountable for the gift that they had been given, one of them prospered his 5 and made 10. And he was called a good and faithful servant. The other prospered his 4 and made 8. And he was called a good and faithful servant. The one who was given 1 buried it in the sand, waiting for his master to return. The master called him a wicked and slothful servant and threw him to the gnashing of teeth. You see, God gave us liberty. He gave us this nation. Our obligation is to prosper it for our children and for the world. If we do nothing and just wait for his return, you will look God in the eye one day at that personal and individual accountability, and he will have no choice but to call you a wicked and slothful servant. This is who we answer to. We are commanded to fear God more than what any man can do to us. And he has given us ample teachings on the way to please him. Daniel Webster said, "Hold on to the Constitution and to the republic for which it stands. Miracles do not cluster. And what has happened once in 6,000 years may never happen again." Hold on to the Constitution, for if the American Constitution should fail, there will be anarchy throughout the world. We are the shining city on a hill. We are the last bastion of hope. If we do not stand for this Constitution and the liberty that it preserves, there'll be no one left. But I want to give you something that one of our dear founding mothers said. Her name is Mercy Otis Warren. And we may have an obligation to the world, but it's dearer than that. Mercy said, "We will stand against tyranny today, or our children will bow tomorrow." You see, we can sit and bury our talent in the sand and live just a short time in tyranny. But what we will have done is to have condemned our children and our grandchildren to purchase back a dear gift that has already been bought for them because we squandered our talent. This is our obligation. This is why Christians have no excuse not to vote. And they have no excuse not to vote according to the dictates of their conscience, which means you cannot elect a man that believes in killing babies. And you cannot elect a man that believes he has the right to force us to do that. It's not simply our obligation. It's a commandment from God. And so, this is why I do what I do. Because I have a 6-year-old boy at home that I have to look at every single day when I'm home. And talk to him on the phone when I'm not. And live with the understanding that at one day, if I don't do everything that I humanly and superhumanly can do to preserve his liberty, I will have to answer to him before I answer to God. I tell him every day, everything I do for you. I put on average 6,000 miles a month on my car. I flew out here, thank you. But I have driven twice, here and to New York and back. And so I am asking you to pray for me. because at 6,000 miles a month, my Saturn view with 269,000 miles already is being held together with prayer. But tell you what, it absolutely is. We are a ministry. I don't charge any group anything to come and speak. So if you are leaders of other groups, I will come back. And you just need to help me get here. How many of you would like to see this lesson taught in your churches? Share this with your pastors. And may I ask you to please support the pastors who are supporting God through talking about these issues. They're not fearing their 501c3 more than they fear God. Support those pastors. They need your encouragement. Can I challenge you that if you have one that is not, I know this is harsh, but maybe he doesn't deserve your support. Because where does his faith lie? That's hard to hear, but it's something to think about. And I'm here to make you think. So, pray for us. If you support a ministry, support us. I have books and stuff at the front counter. You can ask me any questions about those. What I'm going to do now is we're going to start a question and answer survey. We've started a little late, so we're running a little late. I hope you don't mind. But I'm going to give the microphone to Bill. He's going to explain to you how this works.
How about a round of applause for... I'm speechless, and it's a warm-up for tonight. I hope you come back tonight at 6. Call your friends, your family, your neighbors. Get them here tonight.
Your pastors,
your pastors.
Elected employees.
What we're going to do now is we're going to do a couple things. I got a couple of challenges. Before you leave, go to the back. Check out our CDs or books. They're fantastic. They're your possession of her indefinitely. So please do that. Second thing I'm going to do is, as KrisAnne said, she does this of her own free will and conscience. But we got to pay to get her here. So I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to pass a hat in a minute. And if you can, and will, make a contribution to help cover her costs for this week. We appreciate it. Question and answer are going to come up. I've asked her to, because we're videoing this, to repeat the question so we can pick it up and respond. So feel free to do that. After Q&A, feel free to go back and take a look at her books and her DVDs. And thank you for coming. Thank you, KrisAnne.
I have a couple little housekeeping matters as far as question and answer goes. You can stump the attorney. I don't know everything about everything. But I'm not a politician, so I'm not afraid to tell you I don't know everything about everything. The other thing is, if you're going to ask a question, I really, out of courtesy for everyone else, I really need you to ask a question. So if you start to talk a long time and there's no question, I'm going to interrupt you and say, excuse me, can you just articulate the question? If you have something that you want to debate with me or discuss with me, I will be here, so we'll have time to do that later. Does that sound reasonable to everybody? Okay, give me the first question. Who's going to be the first brave soul? Yes, sir. Stand up so I can hear you. Yes, sir. Yes, you. You passed the hat right in front of you.
Is all of this what you just did and what you're doing tonight on tape, on video?
He asked me if everything that I said here today is, and what I'm going to do tonight on tape or video. And yes, it is. I have a 3 DVD set back there. That is my 5-hour seminar, so you'll get this and more. And you can take that with you. Again, if you know a group that wants to have me come back, I'd be happy to come back and teach the 5 hours to you as well. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if you handed this Liberty Council list out to us or...
No, that came from them, but I'm familiar with it.
Okay. I'm just noticing the copyright goes up to 2008, and I'm wondering if it's still current.
Yes, it is. It's still the most current document on their website.
Right, and if you have any additional questions, you can contact Liberty Counsel and ask them. They're very good about that. Now remember, that has to do with religious liberty. That's not everything, okay? So the things that our current Congress that have just passed, that are to the destruction of our Constitution and don't apply to religious liberty, are not on that list. So it's a lot of things that the current Congress is doing. You guys are aware of that, right? I'm not telling you anything new. So NDAA, HR 347, Senate Bill 1813, the Enemy Expatriation Act, which hasn't been passed yet, but is on the floor or in committee. I forgot one, I think. And then you've got now the new amendment to NDAA, which actually is worse. It creates even greater damage. Do you want me to talk about that for a second?
Could you?
Okay.
Please?
You know, that from our state executive. I sent her, Hutchison, and I sent her a letter because that's what she told us Saturday. And the response that I got was about, the bill was passed in December of 2011 to provide for soldiers benefits, to increase, but nothing about the amendment.
She's talking
Okay.
about House Resolution 4310 that just passed.
Okay. We're talking about the National Defense Authorization Act, and what your senator explained to you was that the National Defense Authorization Act is the mechanism by which the government pays and funds the military every year. Everybody knows that. That's why it's a must-pass bill. That's why they shove junk in it like a Trojan horse. Because who wants to be the representative or the senator who doesn't vote to pay the military, right? Even if you stand up and say, I'm not voting for this because this guy threw stuff in it that will steal your liberty, that stuff's not going to be reported in the media, is it?
No.
All you're going to hear is Senator so-and-so hates the military and wants to defund the military. And the majority of the people will hear that and not look any further. Well, the problem is sections 1021 and 1022, in spite of what your elected people tell you, absolutely does allow for the indefinite detention of U.S. citizens. It does a whole lot of really, really bad things worse than that. Okay? There is a section in there called Section 4 Waivers, which puts the authority in the hands of one man, the President of the United States, to not only decide who is a terrorist that needs to be detained, but also apply the power afforded through the laws of war to a nondescript event called a hostility. So now you not only don't need Congress to declare war because we have the War Powers Act, right? Well, now you don't even need the War Powers Act because the powers under the law of war are now applied to a hostility, and who in heaven's name knows what a hostility is? But it gets worse. It not only allows that, but the Section 4 waivers allows the power given to the military under the laws of war to be applied to domestic terrorist fighters. What does that mean? The power afforded the United States military under the laws of war now rests in the hands of the FBI, the DHS, TSA, and by association, your local law enforcement agents when they assist them in their functions. Why do we need posse comitatus if our local law enforcement agents have the power under the laws of war? This new amendment, Section 1033, for the fiscal year 13 NDAA, and when they do address NDAA every year, but they don't have to repass the things that become law. Now they have an opportunity to amend them, but they stay in existence unless they repeal them. It's the funding that has to be reauthorized every year. And so this Section 1033, what it does is it simply says that the right of habeas corpus, your right to a speedy trial, will not be denied. But you see, it's so much more than speedy trial, isn't it? It's about defining who can be detained. It's about the power under the laws of war being applied on their own citizens, arbitrarily, without any check from Congress. Congress has no power to override a Section 4 waiver. They don't even have the authority to prove or deny them. The president simply has to certify that it's necessary in national defense, in the security of the nation. That's it. And it ends right there. Well, not only does this Section 1033 do nothing, but it actually does something very bad. It says that any person detained on U.S. soil is granted this constitutionally protected right. So if you are an illegal alien detained on U.S. soil, you now have constitutionally protected rights. And this was their grand solution to our problem. This, if you watched those debates, if you didn't, you should go back and find them. You had congressmen standing up and screaming, "I will not invite terrorists to come and murder our people." They use this type of language to scare people. Since when did Al-Qaeda need an invitation anyway? Right? But how much more of an invitation can we give them than to promise them constitutionally protected rights when they get here? Don't ask me why. I can't tell you. I have lost even the semblance of understanding for their ignorance. I don't understand it. I don't know. But you have got to call your senators now and tell them to repeal this garbage. Okay? I actually have a very simple amendment that will answer all our problems. It's one sentence. They simply need to pass an amendment that says, let me see, how did I word that? Because it worked out really well the way I worded it. Just give me a second. You United States citizens and legal resident aliens shall be exempt from all provisions of this act. U.S. citizens and legal resident aliens shall be exempt from all provisions of this detention section, whatever they number it. Legally speaking, statutorily speaking, that ends every question right there. And you know what else it does? It amuses me because it'll do another thing, right? Because they all stood up and said, when we started screaming, "Oh, well, we won't do that. We never intended to detain U.S. citizens. We didn't intend. Did you hear that? We never intended to do that." Well, then tell them, put your money where your mouth is. Pass an amendment that says all U.S. citizens and legal resident aliens shall be exempt from the provisions of this act. Because that's all it says. And they'll either have to say, "Oops, well, I actually did mean for U.S. citizens to be indefinitely detained." Put them in a corner that they can't get out of until they tell you the truth or do what you want. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
In regard to this, I know Alan West came out with a video a while back about NDAA saying exactly what you're saying that, oh, he was on the, I guess, the council or something that came up with this, and that U.S. citizens are indeed exempt. He flat out said it, and so, I don't know.
She asked me about a town hall meeting in Palm Beach, Florida, in which Alan West stood before a room of 200 people and said, "I invite anyone to challenge me on this understanding of NDAA," and went on to then read some erroneous statements about NDAA and that completely misapply the law in justification to say that it actually exempts U.S. citizens from detention. It does not, okay? It does not. How many of you have seen my video on NDAA? Okay, good. Go, if you want to find my video, I will walk you through it as it existed in 2012. I'm going to be doing an update when I get home next week, and I'll post that one as soon as I get that done. But go to Google and Google my name, KrisAnne Hall, and then NDAA. You will. The first thing you'll see is my video on YouTube. Okay? Go to the video. It'll walk you through it. You know what the funny thing about that town hall meeting was? That's my home state. I'm very well known in my state. Before that town hall meeting was over, my phone was exploding. Because not a single person in that room challenged him. But they all called me. Or emailed me or texted me and said, KrisAnne, you've got to get in touch with Alan West. Explain to him why this is wrong. See, this is why I tell you when I teach you, I don't want to feed you with information. You've got to be prepared to stand up and challenge these issues. You've got to own this information. That's why I work so hard to put it in your hands. Because I can't be everywhere. And you know what happened when I contacted Alan West? First thing that happened was I had to go through his staff. My very good friend Debbie calls them moat dragons because it's their job to protect the politician from infiltration. And I never got past the moat dragons. After a chain of emails, me trying to present my case to go sit down and talk to Mr. West, even pointing out and giving them the video that says he invited anyone to challenge him on this. The last thing I got was, are you in Congressional District 22? So remember that, ladies and gentlemen, that when you write a check to support Alan West, unless you're in Congressional District 22, your opinion or your words will not be heard by him. And so then I actually went through a common friend that we have, somebody that's very good friends with Alan West, who actually sent my emails to him. And I know he did because he involved me in the chain. He said, Chris, I'm not going to give you Alan's personal email. I said, I don't want his personal email. I just want him to talk to me. He says, but I'll be happy to be the middleman, and so your words will get to him. The last thing that Alan West said was, I will not entertain this paranoia any further, and refused to meet with me. His staff did tell me to go and attend a town hall meeting so I could challenge him in public. I said, you know what, I don't want to do that because I think Alan West is a good guy. I think his heart is in the right place, and I think he has great potential. If I were to stand and challenge him in public, can you imagine the media frenzy that would occur from that? I don't mean to harm him in any way. I just want him to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. So if any of you sent Alan West a check, why don't you send him a letter and say, before I send you another check, you sit down and meet with KrisAnne Hall. Okay? Yes. Pray for them. Because when you watch that debate, Alan West was one of the shouters in defense of this. You see, liberty cannot be maintained in the sight of people who are afraid and willing to trade it. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Yeah. I'll put it in the form of a question so you can tell me what you thought about it. Earlier today, I saw that the HHS mandate, University of Notre Dame, sued the United States of America and religious organizations saying that they don't have a constitutional right to mandate. So,
Notre Dame has sued the United States government over the HHS mandate. And my response to that is, woohoo! Right? Yeah, about time. I talk to people all the time. You know what the most disturbing response I get to this is? Well, this is against the Catholics. It's not against us. They're getting what they deserve. They supported this thing from the get-go. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Seriously? Don't you understand that an attack on one church is an attack on all of us? And so what? Somebody makes a mistake and we've got to keep stomping them in the ground? God allows us to make mistakes sometimes so that we can see mistakes and we can look to Him. So I'm sure there's nobody here that thinks that, but that mentality is out there. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I think what brought all that silliness on is they're scared of wheelchairs, walking canes, crutches, false teeth, hearing aids. They could take on the 82nd Airborne, they don't think they can handle it.
The question, which, shame on you, really wasn't a question. I'll form it in a question for you. How's that, okay? Is this mandate really boiling down to the fact that they want to deny health care to our older generation? Isn't that what you were saying? I don't deny that. I don't deny that. My father-in-law lives here in Texas. He's a physician's assistant. He was a physician's assistant in the Navy during Vietnam. He is involved in a pilot program for, in putting all this stuff into place. He's told me he's ready to quit. If this goes through, it's quit. This is how it works. I don't know what they tell you about the death panels or any of this stuff, and this is not just coming from him. I've heard this from doctors all over the country. There is a clearinghouse. When your doctor creates a diagnosis and prescribes a treatment, he cannot hand that to you until it goes through the clearinghouse first. The clearinghouse will then read the diagnosis and then read a chart according to the diagnosis that the government has established regarding treatment. If the doctor has prescribed something that the person at the clearinghouse does not think is consistent with the chart that the government has made according to the treatment, or even possibly has come up with a diagnosis that doesn't match the chart that the government has created, then the clearinghouse then sends back a new plan to the doctor, rewriting what he's prescribed. If the doctor disagrees, then he has to readjust the plan, send it back to the clearinghouse for their approval, and this continues ad nauseum until the doctor's too frustrated to fight or they come to a reasonable compromise. Or the patient dies. Right? So this is a reality. Even if it's not people saying you live, you die. This is in reality what happens. This law says that you cannot go to an emergency room and receive treatment until you have approval from this clearinghouse. The people sitting in these clearinghouses are not doctors. They're not even medically trained personnel. They're government employees who have been taught how to read a chart. Period. Well, when the government teaches anything, they don't do it very well. So there you have it. Yes, I think the evidence supports that they don't want to provide health care to people that are an otherwise inconvenience and are not worthy of that health care. One more question. Make it really, really good.
When you asked were there any pastors here, were you the only pastor's wife that stood? Was there any other pastors here?
The question is, was I the only pastor's wife or pastor that stood? Are there any other ecclesiastical members here? Any laymen? No.
What can we do to knock them over the head, to tell them that they have to wake up and teach the people what the Bible says?
Okay. She says, what do we have to do to make our brothers and sisters in Christ wake up? And not just our brothers and sisters in Christ, but all believers in religion understand that this is an attack on their liberty. Well, first off, I want to share something that came to me. An understanding. You have to understand I'm a little passionate about what I do. And when I first got started in this a little over 2 years ago, I had this thought that if I could just reach the one right person, right? If I could get Koch brother backing, right? Is that what they said? Or if I could get a senator to sit down and attend my seminar and show them the truth, that in one fell swoop I could affect a nation. And I would go and I would teach, and I would teach to rooms full of people and see nothing from what I did. Nothing. And I can tell you, I get frustrated. I do. Not so much anymore, because I got really, really down and low one day. And I was ready to quit. I mean, I think I really did quit. I quit every day, but then God starts me up again every morning. But I was ready. I quit. I did. I told my husband, I'm done. I don't know, we're going to have to move because I can't work anywhere in the state of Florida anymore. Anybody who Googles my name is never going to hire me as an attorney ever again. And God spoke to me and reminded me that I had been given a call to plant a seed and water it, and that only He can bring the increase. Okay? So I can't make people do anything. My only call in obedience is to do what God has told me to do, and that is to bring the message. I am the messenger. Those who receive the message will answer to God on how they respond to it. He will make the increase. And so what can we do? We can continue to be obedient in speaking the truth. Because then people will choose their path. And as for me and my house, we've made our choice. All right, I want to thank you for your time. We need everybody to have time to go get something